Greetings, everybody. I hope you can hear me, and welcome to another round of webinar with SPJIMR's Center for Financial Studies. As you know, SPJIMR aims to influence practice and promote value-based growth. And in that regard, we try and bring in some practitioners, academics, policymakers, etc., to share their experiences with us. It's my absolute privilege and honor to welcome today Mr. Rajnish Kumar, again, a person who requires absolutely no introduction. It's customary to say that, but in the case of Rajnish Kumar ji, it's absolutely true. But nevertheless, if I was to start questioning right away without an introduction, that will be very, very rude. So very, very short and sweet. Rajnish Kumar ji is the 1980 batch probationary officer, started off from there, reached the pinnacle of becoming the chairman of SBI. SBI, State Bank of India, our own beloved bank, is, as you know, a remarkable organization. It has over close to 2.5 lakh employees, over 22,000 branches, balance sheet size of 48 lakh crore, which is like 25% of the country's GDP. It says it has 45 crore customers, more than the number of citizens in the United States. And this doesn't even include the large subsidiaries that it has, very, very successful and profitable subsidiaries in cards and insurance, SBI Capital Markets, mutual fund, and so on and so forth. And this man that I'm introducing to you was at the helm of that bank for 3 years, between September 2017 and 2020. Tumultuous time as ever. We started off with NBFCs and the NPA issues, then went on to seeing the rise of digital and fintech, which continues as of now as well. And of course, who can forget, he was at the helm of affairs when COVID hit us, and managing COVID through that particular period. So anyway, so a wealth of information, a wealth of practice, a wealth of practical knowledge. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us today. It's an absolute honor and I think a great experience for our students.
Thank you, Narayan, for such a nice introduction.
Not at all, sir. As I said, I'm being very unfair to you because the introduction, the actual one, ought to be a lot longer. But sir, you have written this book, The Custodian of Trust, Banker's Memoir. First of all, sir, congratulations. I think it's a fantastic book. I'm not a great book reader myself, despite being an academic, but your book I read in one sitting. It was almost like listening to you, sir. So how tell us about the writing experience. How was the transition from being a banker, worrying about so many things, to suddenly sitting down and writing your memoirs?
Okay, as you know, I have written the acknowledgement also that the idea was planted at a social event by one of my dear friends who said, that so much is happening in the banking sector and so much is happening in the State Bank of India. Yeah. So you should definitely document what is happening and what has been done or what is being done. But it rested there because as a chairman, you don't get even time to think about anything else rather than being busy with running the bank. And then, of course, in the last phase of my career at State Bank, that COVID came. And when I retired after that, suddenly you feel there's a vacuum. You are so active and then you have nothing to do. And then this idea again came to the mind that let me try to pen down my memoirs and share some of the experiences, both what has happened to the financial sector, what was happening at SBI, and also share a few glimpses of my personal. So it is not exactly an autobiographical account. It is not exactly a textbook. It's not even a management book. So it is, I would call it just some sort of a story which can attract readers. And then, of course, once you start writing, then ideas keep on coming. Nowadays, technology is a big enabler. So you can always, cut, paste, move the content. Several times I changed the flow of the book, repositioned the chapters. So that is a big convenience. I was imagining that if it was when the people used to write the script manually, what the experience would be, and if they wanted to make a change, how difficult it would be to make a change. So, but on the whole, it was I would say, good experience. And then when I had written one or two chapters, then I shared those chapters with one or two close friends and asked them a very honest opinion that whether these chapters are readable or not, whether they would interest a reader or not. I'm not writing a book for myself. I also want it to be read. And then they said, no, they enjoyed reading those chapters. And then I started then developing and the themes, and then finally, in about 10 months, it was over.
It's an amazing book, sir. I just hope you don't have too much of free time on your hands. You're sitting in Gurgaon, not very far from the power centers, and I hope they're still tapping you, because the amount of expertise you have shown in the book absolutely is required for the country. So the book is absolutely fantastic, sir. In fact, what I told you earlier, the questions that I'm going to pose to you have all been crowdsourced from the students. And I can tell you that the feedback from them has been very, very positive. So your book has 3 parts, sir. The first part is about the saga about Yes Bank and Jet Airways and NPAs as a whole. Then you talked about, second part is about demonetization, GST, and YONO, which is obviously something very, very close to your heart. And I'll have some questions about that as well. And the third part is about your personal life, which frankly, I found absolutely amazing. I'm going to start with questions on the third part, sir, first, on your personal part. Right? So here is a secret, sir. People like me who are former bankers, we've dealt with you, we've dealt with State Bank of India. And when we deal with DMDs and MDs and now finally the chairman, we're always scared because we put you on a pedestal, we say, "Ye to bahut bada aadmi hai." And then when I read your book and your personal reflections of in your own words, a humble beginning in the narrow streets of Meerut, and then making all the way up to the big top job. It was absolutely amazing to listen to your personal view. It was a very different perspective of Rajnish Kumar ji that I saw. One particular part which my students found very interesting, sir, is you shared some vulnerabilities in that particular part where you talked about your dramatics, your crush dramatics, and then you talked about your first experience where you had to play the role of a suitor to a girl who was then rejected because of his dark complexion, something which stayed with your mind as a kind of a hurt for a long time. That's a remarkable vulnerability, sir. But more broader, a lot of us come from middle class, lower middle class backgrounds, including some of my students, many of my students. They have insecurities, they have complexes, especially when they deal with very sophisticated people, including an international arena. How did you overcome something like that, sir? And what is your advice to students on that front?
One is that nobody is perfect in life. That is one. And more so about how do you look, it's not in your control. So these things should least bother you. That was an experience, it's a childhood experience. So I thought that even this may be worth sharing with the people. But the kind of love and affection I used to get because I was good in academics. So I stood always first. Even some of my old schoolmates from Dehradun, where I studied in initial years. So they said, we all tried very hard to beat you. We tried, but never could do that. And their parents, they would say, no, you have to be with this boy. And then, participating in all school events, then making friends. So even if there is something, one should never go into shell. That is the first thing. And extracurricular activities and participation is a must apart from studies.
Right.
Unfortunately, I believe that nowadays the burden of study of books is too much and not as much time is left for extracurricular activities, that too, which are physical in nature.
Right.
Students may be spending more time on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, or WhatsApp. But the physical activity that has gone down. And many leadership qualities you develop when you play sports. I share you, it is not in the book, that we went for a football match, and suddenly the captain fell in. And because I was a senior most in terms of that, I was in a higher class. So they said, you become the captain.
Right.
And that was too sudden.
Right.
But even that is small incidence of where you get the leadership of a team. So that is also an experience for learning. So ultimately, each individual has certain strengths, and we should be aware of those strengths, and we should be aware of our weaknesses also, and try systematically to overcome that. And self-confidence is a necessity. That, of course, develops over a period of time. I tell you, when I went for interviews for all this competitive exam, and so I also used to be very, very nervous at that time, and maybe at many times unable to answer the questions also, which were quite simple. But once you join an organization, a large organization like the State Bank of India, so gradually you start developing your personality. But it's very important to be some sort of an extrovert in nature. That is what I feel. And small things. You don't need to read books alone to become a good leader. The management institutes you teach like management skills, leadership skills.
Right.
They are helpful. I'm not saying they're not helpful. But in practical life, what you do, and then the leadership roles which get assigned, how do you perform that? And that adds to your confidence. So that way I can say that I was never lacking in as far as self-confidence is concerned. So that is a trait which people used to, very often my friends also used to say that in terms of self-confidence, nobody can beat Rajnish.
Excellent. That's fantastic advice, sir. Lots of takeaways. Make an effort to speak to people, be extroverted. Don't worry about things you can't control, and not just books. A lot more. There is a lot more to career and life than just books. So lots of takeaways there. Second part in that, which I'm going to pick up, sir, is again from my student, where you make a very interesting comment about values and about dogmas and adherence to principles. I'm going to read a bit of what you said. You talk about a very practical approach to life, which you followed, preventing you from succumbing to dogma or rigid adherence to principle, allowing for a balanced life. And then you also go on to say, I came across many officers in the course of my career who are either very shrewd or very naive, or very lax or very rigid in attitudes and habits, which prevented them from achieving professional success. So this is a question which a lot of our students ask about value. That, should one compromise on values? Should one compromise? How does one decide what one can compromise on and what one can't compromise on? So I found this passage particularly interesting. Can you give us some examples of what you think is too much principles and too little principles?
No, let me tell you the background of that, because this is coming from keen observation of all my colleagues. So one is about the people who exude or arrogance about their views. They are not liked. And many times, even if they are right, how do they come across to others? That makes a lot of difference. So there are certain things in life in which one should not come. And particularly, we are in financial sector. So first lessons we were taught was that don't even think about committing any misdemeanor, even if it is 10 rupees.
Right.
So as far as financial matters are concerned, then integrity, that is one of the most important things on which you should never go. We have learned, all of us, all the students, that if character is lost, everything is lost.
Right.
So in the character, two things which are very important to me are, one, that as I said, personal integrity when it comes to the financial matters, so financial dealings. And second is, don't cheat anybody. That is another. In Hindi, we call it Vishwasghat.
Vishwasghat.
वो कभी नहीं लाइफ ये दो प्रिंसिपल ऐसे हैं on which never compromise. Rest is all like, you give an example. My father said, बैंक में आए वर्ड कि लोग बहुत drink कर लेते हैं, so you should not drink. You should not play cards. So
Right.
these were the advices given by my father, but the circumstances were such that a little bit of intelligence here and there, or we come from a vegetarian family, but when you move out, so you think that it becomes very restrictive. So having once in a while, you can even eat non-veg food. So those kind of dogmas I'm talking about, that when it comes to food habits, these type of habits. So once you know the limitation or set the limit, then it's all right, according to me. Don't exceed the limits.
Sure.
And I have found that this principle, excess of everything is bad. Look, अगर आप excessively शरीफ है, if you are excessively gentle, even that is not a good trait. Then people will take you for a ride.
Right.
So nobody should be able to take you for a ride. You should not be able to बड़ा अच्छा आदमी है. It's good. खराब आदमी कौन है? ये बहुत सीधा है. What does it mean? That सीधा means कि anybody and everybody will come and exploit.
Sure.
That's not a good quality to be, that somebody can come and exploit you. At the same time, as I said, that people don't like arrogance. When you exude arrogance, then you are creating enemies.
Sure.
So even if sometimes you have to step back a little bit, even if you know the other person's view is not correct. So one quality, and which I would like to definitely share with your students, is that at times, particularly when you are dealing with seniors, so even if you are right, at a particular point of time, you should not enforce your view. So my standard trick was, at that point of time, I will not argue. But after 2 days, I will go again and tell that what I'm saying is right. But when there is a time when there is a mood to argue, then probably you need to step back a little bit. So, so that will, like, what happens that you don't offend your seniors too much, because in bureaucratic organizations you keep on offending anybody, everybody, your peers, your seniors. So you may be very right in your views or in your approach or what you think, but the world doesn't work that way, because everybody feels I am right. So how do you resolve the issues? So understanding the other's point of view, putting yourself into the shoes of others. So these are some of the things which help, and they helped in many, many decisions which later on I took as chairman. So first thing is that what the borrower is thinking, what the person who has come to you, what is in his mind, what is in his position. So giving a due consideration to the views of others is very important. But absolutely, when it comes to your own personal character and integrity, that is something which is uncompromising.
Right, sir. So now we come to some of the dirty questions which student asks, because students are students and they are.
Yeah, absolutely.
So related to values, sir, and you've talked about NPAs. In fact, you had to clean a lot of the NPA legacy when you took over as chairman. You write in the book about how you gave your CFO, Anshul Kant ma'am, a hard time by asking her to recognize everything and show losses also if required. Now, one of the allegations about bankers, particularly public sector bankers in the 2009, 10, 11, 12 period, was there was something called telephone banking. Of course, you've written very extensively as to how all stakeholders had problems. It was not just bankers. In fact, problems are bigger elsewhere. But one of the issues was about telephone banking. Looking back, sir, first of all, was there telephone banking in public sector, in select public sector enterprises? And second is, how should a CEO or a person who's sitting right at the top of a public sector bank handle a situation like that? How do you practically handle a situation like that?
One is that I believe, at least, and I'm saying maybe from state bank experience, that the telephone banking, I think it is overstated, number one. And I think because the people from the outside world also knew that in the State Bank of India, Even if they do it, they will not be very successful. So maybe they were doing it less. At that time, of course, 2008-9, we were at a relatively junior level, so never felt that. But even from outside, even within the organization, you don't have to do anything which you believe should not be done. That much again, I'm saying that these are very delicate situations.
Right.
Suppose you are a deputy general manager or general manager, your managing director wants something to be done, and which you believe it should not be done. Then it is your skills. How do you come out of that situation? You have to develop those skills. As I said you in my previous this thing also, that immediately getting into argument or rigidity, that is different. But we in public sector bank also develop some sort of a thick skin and how to delay such matters which you don't want to do. So that also people develop. So that is one. Second is in SBI again, and I'm proud of this fact, we have people like Talwar who stood up, and said, okay, here is my resignation,
Right.
So that kind of DNA is also there in the organization. Third is State Bank of India, luckily. And during my period, I have written again quite a lot about it, that the processes, policies were made so sort of foolproof that even if a chairman wants to do something, is unable to do. So that is one. So you want to, to oblige, say, people in power, and then you want to commit mistakes and then blame them. That is not the right. In the first place, you should have the guts to come out of the situation. As I said, maybe immediately, I did not face in 3 years a situation like this, where a finance minister would call and say, do something, and I had to say no. At least in this government, we had that advantage that there were hardly any calls. Some politicians would call you for a transfer, posting, that is different. But for lending decisions or for any decisions which are not in the interest of the organization, I think there are many ways of not doing it. And ultimately, what is the outcome? You have to retire in 3 years if some situation develops. You will get retired or fired in 1 year, 1.5 years, 2 years. So what is there? So that courage of conviction, as I said, it has to be there. But most of the time, I'm telling you that if you present your case well, with arguments, and if there is an impression about you that you are not sure, what is wrong? If I say, if somebody calls you, and if that job is, or if that decision can be taken and you do it, if it is a right decision, so you should not deny that also because merely somebody else.
Right.
But the image also matters, where people feel that one, if we tell this man to do something wrong, he will not do it. But if something is doable, he will deliver.
Excellent, sir. I think that's very
If
good.
you cultivate that image, then things in life are very easy. But when you are, yourself going overboard to oblige people, and you have in mind that someday you will be rewarded for that, then you are inviting trouble for yourself. So being straightforward, being logical, that why thing can be done and why it cannot be done. And then I think this type of situations will. So once I had a list of 100 people to be transferred. Somebody gave me a list that we want these 100 people to be transferred.
Right.
I said it cannot be done. You tell me 4 or 5 people who really deserve to be transferred, I will transfer 5, but I will not transfer.
Right. Again, lots to mull over, sir, but quick takeaways. Have principles, be objective, decide on the merits of the case, and be tactful. Don't fight. find ways in which you can get your way out, and which I guess is a skill, as you said, has to be developed, and build that image that people won't come to you for the wrong things and will come to you for the right things. So I think lots to learn out there. Just on the same topic, sir, of public sector banks and going beyond now, in fact, few things which you've written in the book, which I found very interesting. One is you question whether RBI has a rational bank policy on bank licensing. And then you go on to say that the proposed privatization of few banks is public sector banks is a significant step in the right direction. Transparent licensing and ownership policy for banks is required. Clearly, it's not there in place. And you also say that dual control should not be there, RBI and DFS, etc., etc. Straight question, sir. Should all public sector banks, maybe barring SBI, and you'll have a view on that, should they all be brought under the Companies Act? And if so, why is it taking so long for it to happen? Lots of people, including PJ Naik, etc., have asked for it, but it seems to be taking so much time to get it done.
So basically, because this is a very sort of a very crucial aspect of banking, because 1969 onwards, this country was accustomed to, public sector banks. They have done a tremendous job as far as the outreach is concerned. We don't know, but if the banks were not in public sector, whether we would have been able to achieve the kind of outreach we have achieved. And now you find banking services available to every strata of the society and across the country in the most difficult places also. So to that extent, full credit to the public sector banks for what they have achieved. And 91 onwards, when the economy was opened up, then we had the private sector banks, and then there is a huge competition. Now, in the age of digital banking, which is 2021,
right,
and the circumstances, the economy, the size of the economy, the size of the middle class, the nature of our composition of our economy, all those have undergone a huge change. So these are baby steps when government says that we will privatize 4 banks to begin with. So obviously, this is very difficult even for the government to in one go say that we will privatize it. And this debate will always be there, that whether the private sector banks, whether they have covered themselves with glory with what all had happened with earlier GTB Bank, then Yes Bank. But at the same time, as I said, that this is a time when there's a huge competition in the market. And the governance structure around the public sector bank, the incentive structure, the HR policies, there's a huge rigidity. And if they have to compete in the market in today's time, so it is inevitable that changes brought. Now, because if the government is owner, one could be that government continues to be majority shareholder and give complete freedom and to the boards and Reserve Bank of India. They in any case are a very, they can regulate the system. If they are regulating all the private sector banks, they can as well regulate the public sector banks. So single regulation control point, and a shareholder's expectations, they have to be met. So government as a shareholder can put forward their expectations and then periodically review the performance. And then as a majority shareholder or a majority equity holder, even if not necessarily 51%, even if it is 40% or 45%. So there are 2 things. One is their shareholder, and government is in any case the most important stakeholder when it comes to the country's economy and the governance, or for that matter anything. So government is in any case a very important stakeholder. So whether you are a private sector bank or a public sector bank, nobody can ignore the government as a stakeholder. But the model can be different, and certain things which government wants to do, they can compensate the banks when this is not a commercially viable activity for them, so that those objectives are not lost. And at the same time, the capability to compete in the current market situation, that has to be there. And that can come only when the public sector character of the banks can change.
Absolutely. So
it is not a sort of a panacea for every problem, but still, I think this is not the right time. And let us see if there is success with, say, in the initial round of privatization. I think that they can carry the process forward. But at least thinking is there and beginning has been made,
sure,
which I consider to be a positive sign.
Oh, definitely, sir. And to your point, even if we don't go whole hog on privatization, if public sector banks can be given true autonomy under their boards, and therefore, for instance, it used to be jokes, sir, what the chairman of SBI gets paid compared to, let's say, the chairman of a private sector bank, and clearly there is a mismatch. So at least giving autonomy by, sorry to say this, but removing DFS and instead having a board-led bank, which is like in DBS, sir, for Singapore,
Yeah,
with the government.
Temasek and these are all like a Singapore government. They own everything in Singapore.
That's right.
And but still, like they work very differently, operate very differently, and as a shareholder, they demand profits.
Absolutely. So, is it a political issue, sir, that the bureaucrats cannot let go of the power that they have over public sector banks?
Things are changing. I am finding a change in the attitude.
Okay.
That is what I feel, that there is a change in the attitude, and there is no more, and that can change with the incumbents also.
Sure.
One set of bureaucrats may feel, no, we should not let the control go. And there is a one set of bureaucrats who believe that this is the time that let us let the control go. So,
fair enough, sir.
And the acceptance also probably today will be much more, because practically we are into an open market economy.
Yeah.
There's a time for everything. This idea in 2000 will be completely probably not saleable, but today it is.
Aapke muh mein ghee shakkar, sir. Hopefully it will come soon, all of this. But just on this, another controversial question which is doing the rounds, which is, should industry houses be allowed into banking? There was a committee, as you know, working group within the RBI which debated this. इस पे आपके क्या विचार है, sir?
देखिए, अभी तो committee recommendations है, and we are waiting for the final policy from RBI. It was in public domain for discussion. But in a country like India, allowing corporate houses to own the banks, to me, it is fraught with great risks. So today you may have a government which is very strong.
Right.
But what is the guarantee you will always have a strong government in the country?
Right.
And the chances of misuse are there. And even when corporates are not owning, but still we have seen so many instances of misuse of power. Connected, related party transactions, overexposures. We have seen all that, even when they own it. There's no argument in both sides that even when they own it, these things are opening, so what else will that? So that is one side. But still, I believe that the license of the bank or bank ownership in the hands of corporates, to me, not a desirable thing.
Not a desirable.
We should have a widely owned banks and professionally managed. And we have examples of likes of HDFC, ICICI, where we don't know who it is.
Probably a foreigner, sir, across all the.
Probably a foreigner, but how does it matter?
Sure.
So, who is owning it? You and me don't know. You would not be able to name even a single shareholder of these banks that owns how much share in that. But they're working, and they're working fine.
Sure. So what about NBFCs or other industry houses which are largely into NBFCs? Should they be allowed to become into full-fledged banks?
No, if at all we have to, then probably that is one route, because they are well governed. But still the issues around related party and connected party remain. And the kind of amendment which Reserve Bank sought as a precondition in Banking Regulation Act. Then will you give powers RBI to, examine the books of all the connected entities? That is what I think this is. So it's a tall order. So most likely, it will not happen. The kind of powers which RBI want, nobody will give. And if they don't have powers, those powers, then they will find it very difficult to regulate.
So last question on this banking segment, sir. And you make the point in the book that almost every bank is too big to fail now. There is no bank which is small enough which can be allowed to fail.
Yeah, the question I've asked there, the debate has always been there, too big to fail. But the question which I have posed is, tell me that how is small is a bank which will be allowed to fail? If a 10,000 crore PMC bank cannot be allowed to fail.
Because of interconnectedness.
So the debate about too big to fail, which has started after the failure of Lehman Brothers in 2008, according to me, it's not a very relevant because of the connectedness. Even I don't know, you would be sure, 1930, the banking crisis in US started with failure of a very small Jewish bank.
Absolutely.
So banking system is such that because of the interconnectedness, you can't allow a bank to fail. So the focus has to shift. Today, I have written there, suppose the State Bank maintains 0.625% extra capital. What is 0.625% if State Bank is trouble? You will need billions and billions of dollars to save an institution like the State Bank. So you can't have upfront that kind of capital. So that's why I have not elaborated too much on the idea of pooled risk capital. But ultimately, a bank like a State Bank or a HDFC Bank, not forbid, if they have to be saved, there will be a huge problem. So 0.625% is my meaning.
So followed from that question, sir, is that are we then condemned to having people like Rajnish Kumar and Shaktikanta Das worry about how to solve a Yes Bank every time something like this happens? Or we go for something like a FRDI bill, which talks about some ways in which bank failures can be handled?
No, definitely we need a very proper resolution framework. And FRDI bill, I think, ran into difficulty because of the bail-in policy. But this is high time that it is brought out of cold disclosure. The issues or whatever the political sensitivities that need to be debated and via media framework. But we should have a proper resolution framework, an empowered authority rather than Reserve Bank doing the running around in resolving the issues around the stressed financial institution. And that institution should have all the powers, capabilities, and take decisions, provide liquidity support, which is much needed. So I am all for a resolution framework, and whatever are the sensitivities around the bail-in cost, that issue can be addressed.
Right. Great, sir. Thank you so much for that. Now I'm going to go to a bunch of questions on a favorite topic among students, which is non-performing assets. And you've covered extensively in the first part of your book. On Jet, sir, Jet Airways, which again you've described very, very well, enthralling reading. One sense that one gets, and like you, we all love that airline. I mean, it was a fantastic airline. We felt proud to be part of that airline. You almost feel sad when we read your chapter of Jet Airways about how an institution which could have been saved and should have been saved, at every stage there was hope, and yet unfortunately it came to where it came to, where it actually had to shut down. Hopefully it will get revived now, but we clearly lost a lot of time in the whole process, and a lot of people lost their jobs and so on and so forth. The sense one gets, sir, is that if everybody agrees that this should be saved and something should be done, why doesn't it happen? You talked about SEBI's issue about the 25% ownership and that the pricing, preferential allotment pricing, etc. These seem like simple things which can be resolved, but yet it doesn't happen in time.
Yeah, no. Sometimes what happens that once you have made a law, And then changing that law also, there is a process.
Right.
But I think that there should be some emergency powers vesting in any authority. Like RBI has very wide powers. Banking Regulation Act, it gives so much powers to RBI that they can almost do anything to save an institution, financial institution. But for others, there are no such powers, excepting at that time, NCLT process was also not there, but even if, no, it was there, it had come. But for the airlines, it doesn't work, because once the airline gets grounded, there's no way you can fly it back. And that was the main fear. But yes, if the SEBI's rules definitely played a role at that time, because there was a potential investor who was willing to buy or put a price which was a logical price, and it did not harm the minority shareholders. That is the view I was holding throughout, that the price which they are offering, by way formula, how did that formula SEBI come out with? There is no rationale for that formula. But the price which was being paid for an airline which is in distress, it was a fair value in my view. And the requirement for a stressed company where you have to make an open offer, this is also defies logic. Because when some company is in distress and if the money is coming, then that entire money has to go for the company. It has to be used for the company. Incoming shareholder, somebody who is putting new money, he will not like to pay off the existing shareholders. Rather, that money would be well utilized and is much needed to revive the company. So these two requirements which were there, they would work well for a going concern, a concern which is like a healthy concern. But those two clauses are not applicable or should have not been applicable when there is distress. And SEBI had provisions that for RBI restructuring scheme, these two would not be applicable. But because RBI came out with a circular in June 2019, and then strangely SEBI took that now we are not, these clauses will be applicable. So I think that was one big impediment. If it was not there, probably the investor, which was Etihad, they would have put in that money. So sometimes rules and regulations which are made with good intention, obviously, and to protect minority shareholders, they can be counterproductive. So these two clauses, when a company is in distress, were very counterproductive. So everybody agreed also, and subsequently those regulations were amended also. But then there is a process. SEBI also has to go through a process to amend any of the provisions they went through. But by that time, a lot of time was wasted. So for future, it is a good development. But the damage was done.
So hopefully case study, and we have learnings from this to learn from and move on. And that way your book is useful. While we've had a lot of success, sir, in the steel sector, and you've written about that as well, while describing the success of the IPC. Power sector, sir, that has been dogging us for a long time, starting from discoms and then even producers for that matter. We had Uday, but still now looks like there's time for Uday point something. Sir, kya hoga iska? What is the way forward for something like a power sector, you think?
So power sector, the problem is that the country, we brought public-private partnership in the generation.
Yeah.
Into transmission also. But distribution sector, by and large, barring a few exceptions, is still in state. And then we have a huge element of process. There is a huge issue around ATC losses.
That's right.
So what is happening that the industry ends up paying more. Honest people, they end up paying more. but the theft continues. So you pay for that also. Then the subsidization continues. You pay for that also. So we are in such a complex situation that we are unable to unravel this puzzle. It's a big, big mess around the pricing of the power. And unless we are able to fix that, which is not easy, so power sector will never become healthy. Because there are huge under-recoveries. And what happens? It gets reflected in the liability of the DISCOM. Even after a lot of steps taken by Power Ministry, that all fresh purchases through LC mechanism, this, that. But it's still discounts of more than 1 lakh crore, I think, to the power producers. So they don't get paid in time. So how do they pay the banks in time? Banks have a 90-day norm that kicks in.
Yeah.
So that's why we have seen so much NPA in power sector. And then what happened ultimately, the cost was borne by the private capital and the banks. When you take a write down, what is happening? That at least the capital cost that you have brought down to a level which at least becomes sustainable. So today, if you put a power plant at say about 7.5 crore rupees per megawatt, but all the existing power plant they have been sold at maybe 3 crore per megawatt.
Yeah.
So who has borne the losses? The banks. Banks are owned by the government. So ultimately, whatever you might have earned from auction of the coal, you have paid and recapitalized the bank by maybe using the same. So we are really, as far as power sector is concerned, because of the political considerations and because of the political need, I would say, to give free power, these things, so somebody has to pay for it. And that is a very skewed system. And we have made our industry uncompetitive globally, at least those industries which are dependent on power as a major input cost. And the impact on the investment as well as on the non-performing loans. So it's a situation which is like one of the most difficult situations.
But sir, just to push you on that, supposing you meet power minister, or even the prime minister, and you were to advise him what needs to be, because sir, power sector clearly is critical for $5 trillion economy, for manufacturing, Atmanirbhar Bharat, production-linked incentives, all of that. So what would you suggest?
There's no need to suggest. They already have a new tariff policy.
That's right.
But because it is a complicated subject, it is not entirely in central's domain. There are states, and that's why the new tariff policy, they're finding it difficult to implement. Otherwise, a solution people know. In this country, you don't have to advise. Everybody knows what needs to be done. As an age, like you and me, we are very intelligent. Then I don't. The problem is that people know that what needs to be done. There is an effort also that in that direction. But at the execution stage, things become very difficult because of political considerations.
Fair enough, sir. Life is complicated. The last question on NPA, sir. Then we'll move on from some of the audience questions. Again, an unfair question. IL&FS, why is it taking so much time to unravel? I mean, 2018, 3 years almost and counting. What is
to some extent, even the legal process is responsible for that. What I understand, that there are many resolution plans, they're just waiting to be approved for last 8 to 10 years. So the committee led by Mr. Kotak, they would have done their job, but still they need an approval. Right. And when the delay happens, suppose somebody has bid for a particular asset, and in 10 months, the situation would change. So even the bidder would develop portfolio. So I think it has also more to do with the delays which are happening in getting the requisite approvals.
Got it, sir. Totally different topic, sir. I love the reference to YONO, and some of my students also love the reference to YONO in your book. Clearly, something which is very close to your heart. And as you describe it, this is a best-in-class tech interface beyond just a Me Too product. You tried to go ahead of the pack. And so the broad question, sir, is that if I look at NPCI, if I look at CCIL, they have come out with some outstanding solutions, which are frankly benchmarks for not just India, but for the world.
Yes.
The dealing platforms of CCIL are, when foreigners used to come down to my bank, they used to say, my God, what is this? And this is so beautiful. And all these are essentially public sector type entities with a lot of autonomy. And, likewise with you in State Bank of India, we did this, you did this YONO system. So the question really is, do we really need privatization to that extent? Is it possible to have very good public sector entities which are committed and have the autonomy to deliver best in class, which even beats what a private sector can achieve, especially in a country?
It has nothing to do with private or public again, because some of the assets, like say NPC, it has to be, and it is publicly owned infrastructure. The entire digital infrastructure, if you look at it, it is the public ownership. Even this Aadhaar card infrastructure. So entire digital infrastructure that is government owned. And then there are users which everybody can use, whether you are a government, you are a public sector, or you are a private sector. So country can be very proud of the fact that we have created excellent digital infrastructure in the country, and everybody is reaping benefit out of that. So it has nothing to do with ownership. Ownership sometimes may make the decision making fast.
Right.
Say, for example, if in a state bank you have to do a thing, you have to take a decision, the process would definitely be much longer. There is no doubt in it. And in the private sector, the freedom to act fast is there. The SBI you can't run without processes. And it is not a bad thing also to have robust processes in place. And but as is the case with YONO, also proves the point that despite ownership, and people used to very often pose this question to me, that you are government owned, but how could you create YONO? I said that government has not told me that not to create YONO. Nobody has said me you can't create YONO.
Sure.
At least that much freedom I have.
Sure.
I don't have the freedom to pay my people, but at least whatever we pay, whatever the capacity is, but nobody has stopped me from doing things. The government has encouraged everybody to go for digital. So there is a constant push for digital. So ultimately, it is all about one is, of course, having the ideas and then the capability to get them executed. So within the State Bank has one capability, which again, I would say we should all be proud of it, that once we decide that something is to be done, then we are capable of doing. Excellent. So that strength is very much there. There may be delays. There may be like something which you want to do in 6 months, it may take you 1 year or more. So that agility part, I think there is an issue because of the size, because of processes, but otherwise nobody stops if you want to innovate or you want to use technology. And then fortunately for a state bank, it has the financial wherewithal as well as the management bandwidth to do whatever it wants to do. Spending money on technology is not an issue for the state bank. Sure. They're not constrained of resources in the state. So all that is there. You have the financial muscle, you have the management bandwidth, and the only thing is that if you have an idea, how do you get it executed? So it is all about execution.
Well put, sir. A couple of questions from the audience. One, Mr. Rakesh Ravi, as well as Mubarak Ali, on leadership. The broad question, if I can paraphrase what they've written, is the skill sets required for the next generation of leaders. as opposed to what the current generation or the previous generation was? What in your estimation is the skill sets required going forward?
So one is that there's a huge change in the style of the leaders. Today, even if you look many leaders, successful leaders, so they will come out to be very like a sort of a common man type. Even one of the largest corporates in the country, you name a few leaders, you will find that they are very much like you.
Right.
So that is one key difference. Second is obviously about like any leader today to be successful, the style has to be collaborative. I have again mentioned the same. Arrogance doesn't work. When you work with young people today, then even at the homes, the environment has changed. Parents don't have as much authority as our parents used to. So things have changed. The relationship with the younger generation. So you have to adjust. So one is, I would say, collaborative approach, and second is definitely innovative thinking is required. And the leader should be capable of thinking that whatever we are, most of the time it happens, जैसा पहले हो रहा था, just look at it and carry it forward. But every stage you can question that whether that was the best way, and that is what is happening. If you look at fintech, startups, so what are they doing? They're changing all the processes.
Absolutely.
So the one day, like in early days, jokingly I can tell, somebody said jokingly in the bank when I joined First Bank, कि पीछे देखो और आगे चलते. So that would be just see how the things were being done in the past and just copy. But I don't think that is there. Now you have to see that everything you are doing in the past, there are other ways of doing the things, or there could be many possible ways of doing the things. And technology enablement is there. So I think successful leaders, in my view, although there are so many leadership qualities which are listed in the textbooks, but otherwise, I think honesty of the purpose, honesty in action.
Right.
Leave aside the arrogance that you know all. So a collaborative approach.
You've mentioned several times, sir, arrogance. Don't have arrogance.
Yeah.
Underline kya apne.
It's not that arrogant leaders have not been successful. So there is no set formula. But the chances of not so arrogant leaders getting more success, the chances are more.
Right.
And in today's world, that becomes all the more important, where you cannot work in a command and control style. But what I have said, just true. So I don't think that style works with today's generation.
Perfect, sir.
And so that is where the collaborative approach, and always saying that whatever you were doing in the past, that may not necessarily be the best way of doing things. There could be some other ways. If there's no other way, then it's all right. But explore.
Makes sense. One student has been persistently SMSing me and wants me to ask you this question. Is the future of banks bleak? Essentially, with fintechs and technology take over banking in the current form?
No, banks means if you say the legacy bank. So obviously, like legacy cannot continue. They will have to change. And they are changing.
Absolutely.
So that transition is happening. Look at the State Bank again as an example. So on the left hand is SBI, on the right hand is YONO. So there may be a time where YONO shifts to left hand and SBI comes on the right.
Perfect. Perfect.
So there are certain advantages of a legacy bank. There is a particularly for banking, trust doesn't come so easy. And in financial matters, that matters a lot. So fintech, they will struggle to be trusted. It takes time. And government ownership for all the criticism, but the ownership itself creates a lot of trust. Government ownership creates a lot of trust in the public sector banks. When you deposit your money, you don't think. You think it is money, it is safe because government is there. It is backing up the institutions. So I don't think that we can just say that the demise of the legacy banks, but definitely the way they work, that working will definitely go on. So if you look at any process, there is again the fintechs, what they are doing, they are just working on a very different methodology on the customer problem, the problem which they face with the existing system, and work a solution. And then you create your backend. The problem with the legacy bank is you have a system. If you want to create any mobile banking application, you have to work with that legacy system. For a fintech, you first design what will be the convenience of the mobile banking and then put the backend systems in place. So that is where they have an edge.
Another interesting question, sir, and I know I'm running out of time, is the days of relationship banking over? Will technology take over relationships?
In retail banking, yes, in a way. And we are moving towards open banking, faceless banking. I was chairman of the state bank, but most of the time I was doing my transactions myself.
Right.
Because by habit, and also to test that what is the product which we are giving to the customer. So it was training purpose. But so much habitual of now doing things on my own. So everybody is in self-service mode for everything.
Sure.
So that way things are changing, but still at times you need.
Absolutely, sir. In fact, there are lots of questions I've not picked up because I'm very conscious of your time. I know it's a busy day for you today. But sir, thank you so much. This was absolutely amazing having this freewheeling chat. And thank you for taking every question and not refusing to answer any question, including the dirty ones. Any closing advice for our students, sir? They'll be very appreciative.
No, first is that I want to wish them all the best, and what they learn in the college or institution, that is always helpful. But biggest learning always comes from experience. And when they embark on that journey, they would be learning many more leadership lessons and lessons for life. But I wish all your students all the best in their career and whatever they are.
Thank you so much, sir. This was absolutely wonderful. And look forward to catching up with you in person. Hopefully, COVID is done and dusted. So look forward to catching up with you in person the soonest.
Sure. Thank you.
Much appreciated, sir. All the best and take care. Cheers, sir.
Thank you.